everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. This is take 2 of the intro because it feels like a long time since I have been in the host's seat for the podcast, and I completely forgot all of the things I was supposed to say. But what I do remember is that Dana told me not to refer to the agenda to keep myself on track. So I have failed in that department as well. Today we're going to be talking about the plot from Indigo by Beverly Jenkins. But as always, before we get there, Dana, tell me what is going on over there and save me from this intro, please.
I was thinking other than you being lost in the sauce, and I'm just in the passenger seat. Okay, I'm just in the passenger seat.
It's not good that I'm the one driving. Like, you don't want to be in the passenger seat. You should probably get out right now. It's not safe.
I know. I trust you. I trust you.
I appreciate that. I'm nervous for both of us, though.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Listen, y'all. This is one of those things where we got to get our groove back. I did think about this the other day about that's the downside of being very efficient with time and recording a bunch at once, that you have these long stints of not recording. And but it's all good because even when you go back and listen to it, it's like, oh, it's such a good episode. So yeah, what's going on? Listen, everything has been flowing. I cannot believe at the time it's recording, we are at the end of April. And so between, birthday shenanigans and this past weekend was a holiday weekend, and I was writing intensively over the past month. So this has just been a very interesting month, and being able to close out the month with reading this book, it just felt like a treat. And here lately, I've been feeling like I keep finding such good books, and I'm just like, I am loved. I am loved by the universe.
I love this for you.
Okay. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is such a good book. So it has been so good. I cannot complain. In Danger Tells, we've been having a blast with our book club selections this coming month. We are going to be reading King of Wrath, which
that's
is
a really big one right now, right? I feel like that's I don't know if it's a book talk pick right now but I feel like I've seen that name around quite a lot.
It's because Anna Wang is fire. She is really, really good. And so I pick our selections to be diverse across the romance spectrum, and I sort of have them in a progression. And so yeah, we're reading that, and we've just been rolling. Our last workshop, since the time that we recorded, we did the Write Once, Market Forever, teaching how to create social media content and content to market to your fans from your book content. And so that was a lot of fun. So I just been feeling like really this year in general getting in my groove. So the fact that we're in the second quarter is just like, oh, we are in second quarter, and I had to count on my fingers, and finally getting in the flow of that, of doing those monthly workshops. And so and now I'm just preparing for our next one, which should be about the time that this goes live, which is I'm teaching on creating series, how to create a series.
This I feel like that one's been on the docket for a while.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Ooh, it's finally happening.
Because we spent almost a quarter in Inner Circle talking about series creation. So trying to do that in 90 minutes.
Whoa, good luck.
Girl.
I salute you. But the wrong salute, because I always salute wrong, and you're top of the head, and we're just... It's more like a top hat way, like the old cartoon characters, rah! It's really a lot more that than it ever is a salute. So I tip my invisible hat to you, I guess.
We're gonna let you. It reminds me. Did I ever tell you about the Jeep Wave?
No, tell me about the Jeep Wave, please.
So my husband, he drives a Jeep. He loves Jeep, and I did not know this. But in the Jeep culture, they have a signature wave. So whenever they see someone that is in a Jeep, they wave at each other using the signature wave. Now I can't show you the signature wave because I don't know it.
Oh, I was like, is it a secret? Oh
No,
my God.
it's like something that they do. Rachel, because I don't know it, whenever I drive Kima's Jeep and someone does it, this is me.
That is, I can just, oh my God, my favorite mental image is you and Keeman driving in his Jeep, and Keeman does some like cool, like suave, like Jeep wave, or like, yeah.
And it's like
And
a
you're
barely, it's like a flick of the wrist kind of thing. It's very, and me. No, just stop. Just
yelling out the window, hi, friend!
Girl.
So much.
Oh, it is so crazy. So the point is, I digress. But yes, so the point is, we're rolling over here. We're getting it in, reading books, getting ready to prepare for this workshop, reading some amazing books, and a couple of them I'm not even going to mention because we have them coming up.
Secret.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I have such a list of books to read because all the books that you were, honestly, all of the books that you were telling me about last year, this year I am reading them like back to back to back to back because they're all podcast selections.
And it's so good. It's so good. And then there's a couple that you're reading now that I can't wait to hear follow-ups for. Because at first I was going to start grabbing them. I'm like, Dana, there's no point in you just grabbing them. Because if they turn out to be good, they're going to be podcast selections. So between book club reads, my own reads, and here, I'm like reading, which is normal. So, yeah. So what about you? Because I done talked about everything. I'm not going to have nothing to talk about in the next episode. But
I literally planned and parceled out my small talk for all 4 episodes so I wouldn't have to repeat myself or anything.
Yeah, we're so bad. We're so bad.
So some of the biggest news, this is going to be relevant in a second. So I finally got a new PC set up, which is, so for anybody who's watching on YouTube, I've got my big dorky gamer headphones on because apparently my new PC is like Bluetooth 6 and my headphones are Bluetooth 5 and they apparently don't connect, which is crazy. And I've got boxes in the background because I've got a lot of tidying up to do.
We can't see them.
Oh, you can't see them? Oh, good. Well, then I don't have boxes in the background and I'm very on top of everything. But the really exciting thing is, so right about now, I'm finishing up The Last of Us. So I'm playing The Last of Us with my Twitch community. So The Last of Us is a horror game, and a lot of people probably know it now because it's a series on HBO. Yes,
I saw that.
So I'm playing the first game, and so season 1 of the show is already out. And The Last of Us really is a storytelling masterpiece. So if you are not into video games, you can watch the show and get the same, just about the same minus the interactive part, phenomenal story experience. They translated that season 1 of that show and the first game into that season 1 so beautifully. They had the creators of the game involved. It was a really thoughtful production on the part of HBO. So I'm playing through that with my community, which has been super fun. It's really scary because zombies, and I'm scared all the time, and I'm getting jump scared every time I turn a corner. Sometimes it's a zombie, sometimes it's a coat rack. Everything just scares me. But it's really cool to get to, this game made such an impact when it came out because of the storytelling, because you took, it is a well-paced, journey through a zombie apocalypse while also being deeply emotional. So where Fallout is kind of, I would say Fallout is very exciting and the world building is amazing. The Last of Us, the world building is also amazing because it's, you're post-apocalyptic, you're always exploring, what does normal look like, when the unfathomable happens. But it is one of the most emotional games I've ever played. It's very deeply resonant, and the internal arcs of the characters are really powerful. So it's been really cool to get to experience the game. And again, I just highly recommend the series if you don't mind zombies, obviously, which means it's a bit gruesome. But it's very, very well done. Super recommend. So that's what we're doing right now, and it's been really fun and, like I said, really scary.
I always feel like when you talk about gaming, I have to really listen to your words. Because if I listen to your bubbly, excited, like if I go into that vibe, I'm going to get bamboozled. Because
it's going to be Ninth House all over again.
Girl, I would like Dana, listen to the words that's coming out of her mouth. Don't get caught up in the, it's fine, come and join us. I love you, we love we, all of that. No. I go there and I was like, what is this? People in water, people dying, shooting, splat, dogs. I'm like, what is this? I'm so confused.
Especially when you're just like, you showed up. This is my favorite thing of all time. So I told you, I started streaming. If you want to come, you can come. But I'm a little embarrassed. It's pretty small right now, whatever. Nobody's there. And just because you love your friend, you were you came in to support. Why was I playing a horror game? Why were monsters shambling toward me? And I am screaming into the microphone and shooting things and throwing grenades and you were just like, what is this? Where am I?
The non-gamer to the umpteenth degree. Okay. Listen, when I played video games, it was the original Mario Brothers. So that just shows you.
Also video game gold, for the record.
Listen, they don't even make them like that no more, okay? I had the original Sega. I had the Atari. My first game was an Atari, okay? We used to have Atari. We used to have to blow it and smack it to work.
Yes. Listen. I still try that with things, by the way. Stuff doesn't work like that anymore. And when I'm having problems with stuff, I reach straight for. I'm just just in case, you get a good. And you're just hoping it'll help. It doesn't help, for anybody who was wondering. It doesn't help, but we try it first anyway, just in case.
Rachel, no ma'am, you will not. Now people think you're trying to spread germs, and they're like, wait a minute now. You don't got no mask on.
I don't do it to my husband. If he's not doing what I want, I'm like, try again.
Let me know if it works.
But if it works, I'll tell you.
Please, okay? Don't hold out on your girl. Oh my gosh, you're a mess.
Okay, so are we ready to dig into the plot of Indigo?
I think
okay. So before we dive in, I just wanted to ask you for an overview of what are some of the things that you want to cover? What are some of the topics you want to talk about with regard to Indigo? And then we'll go into the summary.
Okay. Y'all, this is one of those stories where you really can go in so many different directions. And so a couple of the places that I want to talk about was just in general, to remember the time of this story, which is in the 1850s. And I do have a little something that I just kind of created just in case, but that plays a big part in, before we started recording, Rachel and I always have a little chat and a little powwow. And I realized that the area that I want to talk about with this particular point was something that you and I have found ourselves saying repeatedly in stories. And now, and it's so interesting because we do this, I find myself looking for it. I looked for it before, but it's a more intentional look of how can you, how can you affect the story and the plot based upon the setting. And in this case, the setting not just being where it's located in Detroit, but also, I believe they are in Detroit, yeah. But also the time, because the time makes a huge difference. Also, the fact that this is an African-American historical romance. The author, Beverly Jenkins, one of the things that it goes into plot, and I think it's important to talk about, which is her leaning into something that she both loves and does well. In her past life, she was a librarian, and it shows. And I think there's so much that can be gleaned in the intersection of this is the fact that her really taking some factual information from our country history, and also from our history as Black Americans, and bringing that into a romance context. And one of the things that I always hear from people when I say in a historical African American romance, people are like, oh no, I don't want to read about that. Right. And I think she does such a good job. And one of the ways that I always say it to myself is that she takes a sensitive topic, she handles it with grace, and she makes it sexy. So she is a bad mamma jamma. Okay.
Beverly Jenkins did everything.
Okay.
She was like, let me teach you something today.
Okay. She gonna be like, look, I'll be bringing cultural references. When Birdman was like, put some respect on my name with a K. She gonna put some respect on her name because, girl, I'm a hot mess. Because I think that is so interesting. And even whether you're doing something like, well, I'm not gonna go into it now. We'll talk about it. So that is one of the other things that I wanted to talk about. I also wanted to talk about kind of an offshoot of this is really thinking about utilizing those circumstances, not just to move the plot, but it kind of bleeds over into how the characters change because of the plot and the circumstances. It's sort of layered, and again, one of those things that we've talked about quite a bit. And I think one of the things that this book does deceptively well is that it's almost like melted into each other. So it's kind of like whenever we have conversations, and it's hard to talk about the plot without talking about the characters, and it's hard to talk about the characters without talking about the plot. And that's because it's like it's been soldered together. You can't separate them. And I think that's what makes this so good, that you can't think about the characters without thinking about the story, and vice versa. And so she does a really great job of using the plot to also have these sort of emotional arcs and growth. And yes, that can kind of go over to the character growth. But I think one of the things that she does well here, and it really was instrumental to me as a writer, and that I think of it always as a given, is like you really can see the change of your protagonist and your hero as we move forward. And so I think overall, you have this opportunity to have this story that we looked it up. It looks like it was either 1995 or 96, but 96 is probably the consensus of when this was released. And so that means this book is 30 years old, right? That's 30 years old. And you can still, this is a masterclass. And the fact that you can still glean so much, and that you can see things like we've talked about, tropes that are popular right now, being done in a way that feels very fresh, very you can read the story right now, and I feel like this is very timeless. And so we're going to talk about all that, and I'm sure there's going to be some other things because you have questions, but I really feel like it's important for me to preface that we're not going to go over the plot, like we're not going over each beat and all of that. If you want to do that, read the story. You will not be disappointed. Maybe a little bit. I didn't like the audiobook. However, but it's okay. You know what I'm saying? It's okay. But I think you would not be disappointed. I think this does a great job of having a true romantic suspense where the progression of the romance as well as the suspense plot are in tandem. And it does a great job of that while being very true to not just the historical nature because of the setting and the time, but historical as in also her I think it was her desire, and I hope I'm not overstepping, her desire to educate readers about what was going on at that time. And so I think you can walk away with so much in this story, probably way more. Like you probably would notice it more if you heard this conversation and then you read it. but even if you didn't, you still would, because of the way that she did this. So this is, like, I say this over and over again, like, this is my all-time #1 favorite book of all time. And I have always said that. And when I tell her that, she's always like, oh, and I've interviewed her. She is the best person, just so warm and sweet. And to me, it's like, I think it's done in a sense of excellence, maybe not always dead on of what you would say in this time for writing. But I think because of the way it was done and what you glean from it, it's still like one of the best books that you can get your hands on. So if you can, I would definitely do that. So that was a huge overview, and we still got to dive into it. But yeah, that's some of the things that I really want to talk about in this discussion.
Amazing. I definitely should have had you do the summary first. I was like, let's just get a quick overview of like what we're going to talk about. We should have done the summary first. The summary is going to help tremendously with context. So before I added any additional thoughts of my own, how about you hit us with a summary?
This is why you have to stick to the agenda. You want to do something else, girl? We got to dive in. Okay, here we go.
I get a wild hair and I'm like, ooh, this feels right. And then we do it and I'm like, nope, that was wrong. Okay.
It's okay. It's all right, y'all. We taking this as we go. Okay. Y'all, I just did a little summary using ChatGPT, so I'll just read what I have. Indigo unfolds with a plot that seamlessly blends romance, suspense, and historical tension. When Hester Wyatt shelters a wounded stranger, Galen Vashon, a wealthy and wanted abolitionist, their lives become entwined in a dangerous game of secrets, loyalty, and survival. The story builds through a slow burn romance layered with external threats, community pressure, and personal reckoning. Every plot beat, from forced proximity to betrayal and resolution, deepens the emotional stakes and reinforces the theme of love as both sanctuary and revolution. It's a masterclass in using historical context and external conflict to shape internal transformation. So with that said, y'all, let's dive in.
All right, let's get to it. So, one thing I do want to say, and you had told me this before I had read it, that, Beverly Jenkins was a librarian before she started her writing career. And I do think this book is a really great example of taking a subject matter that you're passionate about and crafting a story so that you can showcase this thing to the world, to people who might, maybe have had some contact with it, but might otherwise not know. So reading about the Black abolitionist movement in this book was really, really cool to see, to get to learn that there were, so many publications and so much scholarly work being done. And, it really filled out my understanding of what was happening in the North at this time with free Black abolitionists and what, so really it expanded my understanding of this time period. And that's, when you particularly, she did a romance, which is very, friendly to the laity. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be a historical expert to enjoy a romance. And so, wrapping this romantic story and this suspense story in this historical context that she's so passionate about gave her the opportunity to showcase this knowledge inside of a story where, we're invested in Hester and Galen, but as we're following them, we're learning so much about the world they inhabit. And I think that's really the beauty of, taking a topic that you're an expert in and using it in genre fiction in particular. We saw this with The Whistleblower, where I learned more than I ever thought I would ever know about British politics through the lens of Robert Peston, who brought his expertise into genre fiction like crime. And the same thing with Beverly Jenkins, right, who brought all of this historical knowledge into a really engaging romantic suspense plot. And that's so for anyone who's has these, particularly with history, but I think a lot of subject areas that they're passionate about, translating that into genre fiction is a great way to translate that passion and share it with other people for them to get to experience and learn about that.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. I'm going to say on the flip side of that, especially at the beginning of this discussion, is that sometimes when people hear that, that will make them not read it, right? Because we don't want to be reminded, right? This is during the time where slavery is still going on. Galen, who is the Black Daniel, is in crosses paths with Hester as a part of moving in the Underground Railroad, and she shelters him when he is wounded because someone tells of his past coming through and moving slaves, and so the reality is that's not sexy, right? Like, that's why I always tell my clients when they do something and they want to put these weird people together. Okay, is that sexy? That's all I want to. And is that a technical question? Nah, not really. But if you got to be like, if you got the squint, no.
If you have to think about it or look at it from a different angle, it might not be.
That ain't the one, sis. Keep it pushing. So I think what sometimes happens is once you realize, like, this is it's in 1850. The fact that it is involved in the Underground Railroad, it is during the time of slavery. It is something that, and I didn't say it in my for this, but I know I said it to myself over and over again, that Beverly Jenkins is unapologetically Black in how, not just how she handles this topic, but just like not sugarcoating or not overly doing it. It's not done in a grotesque way, but it is done in a very factual way. And the fact that you can still have such an amazing romance in the heart of this, and have it so that not only is the reader hopefully coming out of this with a better understanding and a better worldview of this, but also the characters are. And that's one of the things that she does as well, right? Because the station and position of Hester, who you'll hear about this a little bit more when we talk about characters, but of Hester being an ex-slave who was, she technically should have been born free, but she wasn't, because her father sold himself into slavery and fell in love with a slave, and she was born a slave, and she was bought and taken to the North. So she was raised in the North from the time she was 9 years old on up. But because the plantation that she was on was a dying plantation, they used to color cotton, and that's how they used the kids. And so it would stain their feet and it would stain their hands. And over time their hands and their feet would turn purple and or blue. And so that's where the indigo comes from. And so her hands are stained. And so to her, that it almost makes her unlovable, right? Because she's always stained by the fact, whether she's in the North, whether she's educated, she owns her home, she owns land, she is still seen as, a dark-skinned woman, Black woman, and a slave, ex-slave. And so that she manages to carry off and land and have some of the best main characters ever in this circumstance, it's like epic. And it's not in spite of, it's because of, right? So it makes them better. It's what they, and one of the things that I wrote down is like, it's their passion, them, what they want in the times for themselves and their people. It's what they do. It's what they're passionate about. And it's also part of their love language to each other, right? Of being supportive and knowing the Black Daniel is abolitionist, and he is wanted because he is known to go down south because of his fairer complexion, and he's able to buy slaves and bring them back, and he's a wanted man, but he is a man of means, and he is a wealthy man, but he chooses to use his time to do this, and it's something his family doesn't even know about. But eventually he shares this with Hester. And so one of the things that I will say structural wise when it comes to this, we see up front what we're dealing with. The prologue already sets the tone that, wait a minute, wait, he did what? right? You already like, wait, what just happened? And we haven't even got to chapter 1. So when we get right into chapter 1, Hester and Galen, and we know him at this time as the Black Daniel, which is his name on the road, they meet each other immediately. Black Daniel's almost dead. And I'm not giving any away, y'all. It's good, page 1 of the story. And one of the things that I absolutely love about this story, especially when you are talking to clients and they want to write a romantic suspense, nowadays it's really hard to find stories that are true romantic suspenses. People will categorize them that way. But having one where the romance and the suspense are sort of match pacing each other, and they are so intertwined that you cannot sever one from the other, is so important, and that the major points and beats of a story evolve around both and not just one is not common. So the fact that it is here, that when they meet each other, her mind is nowhere near on finding love. And when he sees her, his mind is nowhere near on finding love. He literally is like, she calls him a cyclops because he's wounded so bad that one of his eyes is swollen shut. And he's trying to see her. And he's like, I can't even see her. Like, it's not funny, but he's like, listen, this makes my head spin. I can't see her. I'm trying to focus. And it's like an enemies to lovers almost, because baby, they go at it. They go at it. And it is so funny because when I was reading part the other day, it was like, if I got to pray for the food, she was like, you know, he's like, if you knew anything about me, you know, I'm not a praying man. Baby, listen, he was ornery, he was mean. And she was like, she was more committed to ensuring that he had his health to be able to continue the work because she respected his work, but she couldn't stand the man. Okay, she could not stand that man. And so I think what it did, having such a vivid display, and we'll talk more about the characters and the character episode, but it's important to the plot, because what it did, I think, is that if you can endear us to the characters, and you can make it so that those characters are likable and that we are invested in those characters, we can endure almost anything. And I think early on, them being together and having that forced proximity and having this thing where we can, even if he was grouchy and we understood why he ended up getting captured and what he did and what he did and how he sacrificed to be in that situation, and we understand her and what she did and how she held his confidence and what she was willing to do to help, you begin to really care about them. So therefore, the sting of the time and the sting of the subject matter doesn't hurt so bad. Mm-hmm. It's still realistic, but it doesn't hurt so bad. And I think the way that translates now is that if you have something that has a very sensitive subject, I think what we do now, and I know we talked about this in the overview, but because of now, everything is so in your face that we're almost desensitized. So it's almost as if the story that she told then would really be suited for now, because we wouldn't be as shocked. I think we'd be more shocked because people are unaware of the facts than the circumstances, right? But then it's like you're trying to buffer for both. It wasn't this shock overstimulation. This was it was in the 90s. And so I think her really sort of bringing our eyes in, almost as if she's holding up a pen and she's saying, look right here. Mm-hmm. And then when we pull back and we see all of this stuff, the fact that at the time Hester is engaged, but she's planning to just marry for convenience and companionship. The fact that he is very wealthy and moves in a totally different set of circle, and how the two of them would have never, ever crossed paths in any other circumstance. And I think what that does is you are able to play with the dynamics that make for really good romance writing, and use that to almost mold and massage the world that you place them in. And that's why I think this is such a masterclass. So with that said, you have that suspense, you have technically some political intrigue, because I'm saying political intrigue, but the reality, it was slavery, but that was rooted in politics. At this time, it's rooted in politics, and they talk about that not extensively, but enough. And I think in nowadays terms of us reading a story, we would say there was a lot of info dumping, right? It was. It wouldn't be as acceptable now.
Yeah.
She did a good job of tying it in, but I think because of the subject matter, it still works because you have to have an understanding, because it's so we're so separated from it now, right? And so you have that, and so you have Galen, who's essentially on the run. There is the threat, which we know immediately because he is in a life or death situation on page 1, essentially, from both slave traders, also I can't remember what they call that, for the bounties, the bounty on his head, and people trying to collect the bounty. And it is a risk to not just Galen, but also to Hester, because she's already, whether she has her freedom papers or not, her hands are stained. And then they could just take somebody and say, well, you're a slave, look at your hands. And there would be no way that she could fight that. And she's a woman who is living on her own and who has, she's not wealthy, but she has things that most blacks in this time did not have. She had land, she had a home, because her family historically were born free. And so she does have some sort of liberties that many don't have. The last part about this sort of suspense, intrigue sort of environment is that it really does make it a community undertaking. And one of the things that, another thing that Beverly Jenkins does in this story is that she puts everybody on the page, almost on page 1. Now, not in the, I don't count the prologue, but like page 1. And I'm realizing the more and more I write, the more and more I read stories, that the reality is that is hard to do. To have everybody, friend or foe, president accounted for.
My fantasy writers, probably every fantasy writer listening is like, yes, it sure is. And my fantasy writers, the task of spacing out the introductions, we got to get everybody on the page, but we can't get too many people all at once. We got to make sure that they're distinguished from each other. I feel like this and actually, because we're in historical fiction, I've said this before, is so much like fantasy, where you have to provide context while trying to avoid info dumping. So these are all tasks that my fantasy writers pull their hair out over. It is hard. It is not easy to do this.
Yeah, and I think that it can, in this case, I think it could be a little bit easier if it were, I don't know, some sort of investigation, or if it was some sort of crime, or it makes it make it a little bit easier, even if it's not a person, but you put something that's adjacent to it, so it's easy to try to draw a connection. And here she's doing this in a communal setting, and it makes it so that if you think about it, to me, now you could tell me if I'm wrong. In my notes, I was like, I think that this could be a whodunit, right? It's a little bit, it's not on the spectrum of something lighter, but we are wondering, well, who was it?
Yeah, because Galen introduces very early in the story. I mean, we're talking the first chapter or two. Someone in your town sold me out.
That's right.
And the whole story, you're just wondering who's responsible for this.
Exactly. And so so she's doing layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. All the while, these are people that you're coming to know and love, and you like seeing the dynamic of them, and you see them in community, and you see them, working for the cause, and them looking out for each other, and them attempting at living a life that at this time the country does not want them to live. And so it's like they're fighting even harder for it. And so all of those things sort of come together. and all the while doing an amazing job of keeping that suspense not too far away, right? And that it's near, and it's always getting progressively worse. And in that it exceeds beyond, and this is something that I think Beverly Jenkins does well, especially for the time stamp of like, it goes beyond the thing, like it does get to life or death stakes in her stories because of the nature of the times, of that people just were not, Black Americans were not treated with the same liberties as others. And so that just made it that much harder, challenging for them. And so you have all of this, and it's all, again, based in the Underground Railroad, and it's all up in front, almost page one. And I will say this about this and see if there's anything else you want to add to it. I think, I remember, I always thought, I'm not a huge fan of prologues in romance. But in this story, I always, I would say, liked it / tolerated it because of how it was. But what I can say now, after years and years and reading this story a million times, is that I have a better appreciation of how it's set up, because it introduces her wound.
Yep.
So we never get it twisted that this is a romance. Mm-hmm. That this is about a person that has a very traumatic relationship with love.
Yeah. And
that's the part that blows your brain up, because if you look at this, a historical Black romance, no, I don't want to hear about no slaves. I don't want to hear about no whips. I don't want to hear about nobody being sold. Like, I don't want to hear about none of that. So again, the fact that she takes something that's sensitive, that's challenging, that she handles it with grace. She still makes it sexy, and she delivers a power pack romance that is like, oh, like, who did I tell you was my favorite male character? Was the Black Daniel, Galen. And so I think, again, so this is just, it's an amazing, and that's the biggest, part of this story.
Yeah. So, and this actually leads into like one of the questions that I had. So I really enjoyed, so at least at the end of my copy, I don't know if this is like in the original publication or if this was added later, but at the very end of the book, there's a note from the author where she just talks. Okay. Mm-hmm. Where she just talks a little bit about how she came up with the story and how she approached it. And so she wrote specifically, because the story of Hester's parents was based on, a factual account that she had found. But she says very clearly, so she writes that the harsh and painful realities of slavery have no place in the feel-good arena of mainstream romance, which is why she ultimately decided to tell the story about Hester, right? Where it was so there's a couple of interests. So there's just one thing that's I really was in awe of her, like the thoughtfulness that she brought to the project, because she found this historical count and it was fascinating to her, but it's like positioning that within romance. Like she knew that those two things did not belong together, and she was not going to try to turn something that is horrific into a hot, do you know what I mean? So that mm-hmm. like that removal where she chose where she's setting the story so that she can still, bring almost like light and education to this aspect of the topic without, again, this is like a mismatch of our historical setting and what romance is, which is a feel-good genre, right? So the question that I wanted to ask about just, I would say, historical romance in general, is what are some things that authors should consider when writing romance in historical settings? It could be this historical setting or, any other historical setting, but what are some things that authors should be keeping in mind with the fact that romance is intended to be a feel-good sort of fantasy type of genre, and the just various historical settings in which stories take place?
Here's the thing, and a couple things I want to say about this. I think it's something different if you're saying it from the context of what I would consider more mainstream historical romance, because a lot of it is like Regency and all of that. Your biggest issues are usually classism, the differences between gender. I think the moment that you say an African American historical, which are very few, they are very, very rare. It doesn't just go into the fact that women didn't have the right to vote, or they had to be married, or that they couldn't be in a room and they had to have a chaperone, and all these different things like that. You go into these life or death stakes. You go into these things of families being ripped apart. Like, you go into things that are very traumatic, not just for an individual, but for a community of people. And so I think even having this, like, answering this question is really hard to do, because the moment that you put the race or that ethnicity on it, it automatically just changes that totally. So what I would say here, I think the pulling up the note from Beverly sort of just helps you to understand something that I think authors can really take from this, of like, you know, you want to write about this thing, but you know what? You also want readers to read it. It may be your thing and your jam and you just want to get this out. But if you can make it so it's almost like, as a mom, you know, when I wanted my kids to really have their vegetables, I used to make them smoothies, and I used to put spinach in the smoothies. You need to put the spinach in the smoothie. You know what I'm saying? You need to put the spinach in the smoothie. And so in this case, you know, you've got to think about, you know, what do you want to take from this the most? Do you want it that you want people to be turned off by the treatment of it? You want them to feel angry or unseen or unheard? Or do you want it to be something that in this case can be empowering? How you can find ways in your own way to be strong and to make change, and even if it's in your own small way, how you can choose to live a full life, which is something that Galen really wanted her to see, making mud pies and laughing. Like, you got to accept the good when you get it. And that could be for anybody. Poverty, losing your job, not being in the circumstances that you maybe once was, divorce, any sort of things. It's like there are so many different layers of that. I think in this case, though, it's something that is sort of this collective wound that gets swept under the rug so much. And so I think it's something different than when you, again, have it where it's in a context where, whether it's, you know, white American, which I've never read a historical, like a U.S. Historical from a non-Black, but I do like read a lot of Regency. And so I think it's something about that too. I think the Regency is a little bit more like glorified a little bit, because it's very gentlemanly, and it is about the protection of women, and even though they don't want to be babied, it's almost like to making sure that they're safe, and you know, and all that stuff. So I think the thing is, like, I would say, you know, have both the sort of respect and decorum for the facts, but also the tone, the time. And I would say be very aware of what you want the readers to walk away with. What is the promise that you are delivering? And again, I think it goes to the fact that we had that prologue, even though you're like, man, that's messed up. But man, he loved that woman, you know, and like, that's just like, oh, I don't want that. If that's what love make you do. And then look what love made her do. And so the last thing that I would say about this in general is, I would say, read in that niche. This is not one of those times that I believe adjacent is equivalent. Adjacent is not equivalent in this case. You want to read in this niche because it's almost like seasoning. Like, if you are making a certain dish, certain seasonings are known in that culture or in that cuisine that are present to make it authentic, right? And so you want that as well. And the final thing that I would say is, I think, especially in romance, like, you can change the time, but at the end of the day, we just want to happily ever after. And I believe that this context of this shows that everybody wants that. Yeah. Just because you're in these circumstances, right? And so people are like, oh my gosh, romance. But at the same time, to know that you're going through this and you pick up the book and it's like, like when Shu came to that house, ooh, it doesn't matter how many times I've read this story. It makes my skin crawl. It makes my heart drop. And to know that at the end, in its own way, because it's still in a historical context, they get their happily ever after. And the fact that Beverly Jenkins does us one more when we get to see them again in other books, that it just helps us to feel like, okay, right, that we can feel okay about that. So that's what I would say, which is a lot, but I think this is probably one of those times when it comes to romance where you really do have to be a little bit more intentional about how you do it. You're not, I mean, you could, but you're not going to just be in here just like willy-nilly in. Not on this. Not if you want to really do it justice. And I think for when it comes to African American historical romance, because there is no way that you can get around whether you're in the North or the South, the times, which is why I think you see it so infrequently.
Yeah. Wow. I want to make sure that we cover all of the different aspects that you wanted to talk about this story, but it really is it's a testament to the work that Beverly Jenkins did, right? And I think that she does an amazing job of infusing something painful with, like, through the story of Galen and Hester, with like a sense of like hope, and that love matters, and that Hester and Galen find happiness, but also, like, I think something that she does really well as well is that them finding happiness doesn't cause them to go into their own bubble and enjoy their happiness, and it's right, but they spur each other on to doing good in the world and like putting their energy, and they make each other better, right? Even Hester introduces Galen to I think they were called free products, right, where like I don't know where he got all of them, but he just, he loads her up with free products, and then he stops using, I think he stops using sugar in his coffee or tea, and he uses maple syrup, right? And so, like, you see the way that they make each other better and help each other to move through the plot in the world that they occupy together, and they grow and they do it better, because that, like, they're able to do more and do better because they're together, because they have improved each other and spurred each other on to do good in the world.
Yes, I totally agree. One of the things that you'll also see in the story, and I think it was a great job done, is like you sort of have this, the world is big at the beginning of the story, right? Like, we are really seeing them trying to navigate not just relationships, not just their race, but also in the context of what's going on in the government in the country. And then as the story moves forward, it sort of goes inward, right? And then we even transition to a point where we see the things even that you can experience now in America, which is the differences between economics and class. And that can also be shown in skin tone and all those dynamics, and you see that. So basically, it doesn't dwell in that thing that can be so like it can be too much. And I think she handled that well too. And then it sort of comes in, and we start seeing like Galen in her world. I like when he tries to wash dishes and he's never like dried a dish before, and she jokes like, "I bet you got servants to do that," and he's like, he freezes, right? And then her eventually going into his world, and in his world, she would have never been accepted in his world, right? And the reality is, she actually would have been, like how his aunt loves her, and so I think that's the other part. And what I think that also does to the dynamics, and this is one of those things that I think sometimes people get wrong with alpha males. And I don't want to say wrong per se, but I think you can give that alpha male persona so much more depth by giving him layers. And in this case, he was the player. He was the bad boy. He was the one when he was like chilling in, so he was like, come in and realize, oh, wait a minute, I pumped my brakes. His mama was like, she's like, wait, you just say come in? Like, what kind of world? Like, she's like, what, what kind of existence do men get to live in? That you could just be like, a woman can come in your bath. And so I think what it helped you to do too is like, it's like, yes, this is all going on out there, but their world was kind of contained. It was contained in her house and eventually to the community. And then eventually we get back out to the big external problem that in a lot of ways it's always constantly applying pressure, even all the way down to the root of whether they will get their happily ever after or not. And it's sort of like always making sure that you sort of have these sort of tethers to those moments, even if we don't see it directly, they feel the effects of it not knowing that it's there. And I think she does that well so that we don't stay in this place of slavery. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it is something that does come back around. And so she balances that really well. And so what I will say is like she uses sort of, and we actually covered almost everything here, but she uses those sort of historical realities to help both of them to change and grow. It kind of made Hester bloom. Yeah. And for Galen, it made Galen more, have more empathy and have more awareness of other people. Yeah. And because of his boldness and sort of his, he's like a bad boy, right? He like, I ain't gonna just do it. I'm about to do it big, right? Y'all gonna have to take me down, which they tried to do. But because of his boldness and him like being unapologetic about how he takes up space, it almost was like, let me give her 50 feet, right? And she learned to grow in her, her wit and her sarcasm. And it was always there, but it was also tempered by poverty and station. And gender, and the fact that whenever you think about the hierarchy at this time, then the dark-skinned Black woman was so it's almost as if because of his boldness and bigness, it sort of gave her room to stand in her fullness. And he always saw her as a queen and beautiful, and I think that's the thing that romance gives us in spades, and that it really can say a lot to, yes, it can be an entertaining read, but I think it can also be one of those things where people can learn how to just like self-acceptance and being your own kind of beautiful, right? And being your own kind of beautiful and being unapologetic about that. And what it did in the end is it made them a very powerful duo. That he was more powerful because of her strength and her willingness to support him, and just her stubbornness that got on his nerves is what helped him to be even more of what he was, and vice versa, right, for her. And so seeing those characters, and we'll talk about characters, but seeing them move through this plot, and the plot is forcing them to play with that dynamic. And the great thing about this book is at the end of the day, a lot of it's happening, but you don't see it, but you feel it. Right? You don't, when you go back and you read it again, every time you read the story, you see something different, because that's how layered it is. And I think, again, which is why at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I feel like it just brings it all together, and you could just keep reading it over and over again, and it becomes this thing where you are rooting for them, and it changes both of them. It changes them in the best possible way. I mean, even to the point of like, when you go to Future Stories, they have all these kids, and to know in Story, she's like, no, why would I want to bring kids into this? All right. And then you go in Future Stories and they have 4 or 5 kids. And then in Beverly Jenkins's contemporary romances, they are descendants of Galen and Hester.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What a way to like take a series and just give a through line, right? I mean, just pull that thing straight through to the contemporary. That's awesome.
Yes. So, I mean, and I think, and I pretty much have covered everything. I think the biggest thing is that in the story, you're going to have those dynamics of the romance, the suspense, It is a slow burn. It's still on the page steamy, but it is a slow burn, which I think it says a lot about, because of the context, but also because of the time. And it's explicit, but it's a slow. And you do deal with some of these things where it's a little bit more sensitive subjects. But I will say that I really think that this is a story that it would have been interesting had it been released at a time like right now, because I think our sensitivity to certain things are not there. So I think it could have been maybe even a little bit more in your face, a little bit more, a little steamier. And I think this is something that you can, a very, 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 very timeless read, that you can still enjoy, even now.
Yeah. So when we're looking at, the plot of Indigo, are there any like parting tips that you would leave authors with, who read this book, or what, things that they should consider, or questions that they should maybe be asking themselves, whether they're writing romance, whether they're writing historical romance, like what are some of those kind of parting takeaways that you would advise for writers?
Well, because we've talked about romances before, you can look at other romances. You're going to see the romance here. I don't know if I would per se say the romance itself is the unique aspect of it. It's a romance. I think what makes this unique is a lot of the other things that we just have to understand, that it was written at a different time. The historical aspect, how the treatment of it on the page was a little bit much. That could have been a little bit, sprinkled out a little bit, but it was what it was. And I would also say that if you find that this is something that really makes you excited and you'd like to give it a try, be intentional, but also be patient with yourself. I would read stories like this in passes, because you're going to see it's a lot going on. And so reading it in passes so that you can begin to sort of I think this is not one that you're necessarily dissecting everything, but you're getting an understanding of how that suspense plot sort of moves, how the romance plot moves, and how the sort of external circumstances that we find ourselves in, how that moves. The final thing, and this is one of the areas that I literally have a handful of historical ideas that I have in my brain that one day I'll feel brave enough to try. But I don't know. I feel like it is something that you've got to be very intentional about. And so with that said, I would be very intentional about the historic aspect that you choose to embrace. Here, unlike if you were doing something like Regency, a lot of that is more of what were the rules of society, sort of like decorum, what were the different classism things are still an issue, but it's not life or death stakes. And I think that changes the dynamic of the story a lot of time. And not all of them, because some historicals that are, Regency historicals, they can still be life or death stakes. This one, just by the nature of the fact that you have a historical in the United States, it just changes. And so I would say she was like, I'm going for the big enchilada. She went for everything. And I'm like, whoop. I probably would just say like a little thing. Like she has one that's like in a small town, like a small black town, and it's the first black female mayor or something. Something like that is different than there in the Underground Railroad. Yeah. And this is a station on the and so I would be mindful of that. And the last part I would say is I don't know. I don't have the words to say it other than treat it with a sense of delicacy and reverence, especially if it's something that really can be almost like this staining quality about it. I don't think that means it doesn't have a place in romance, because we see that it clearly does. And I think when done right, it can make people curious and want to read more. So her author notes in the back of the book, I couldn't wait to get my hands on those. And I think that's the thing where when you begin to sort of do these sort of genre mashes or crossing different paths and different literature together, that you begin to have this opportunity. And I think the opportunity will be lost if you don't handle it with care, especially for this. I think people reading this will come away with an appreciation for African American historical romance, I think they can also definitely come away with it with a appreciation and respect for Beverly Jenkins. Let's respect on her name with a K. For Beverly Jenkins. And I think you will absolutely love Hester and Galen's love story. Like, you will absolutely love it. Now, some of the other ones, you love them, but girl, it's trying. You got to take it. It's, somebody is Black. It's just how it is. And I think this is I think this can also, as far as the sort of patterning, can be even done now. And in a modern, sense, it wouldn't have but so having it so where the communal aspect and the environmental aspect is a contributing factor or an agitation to what's going on as well. And so it was almost like it was good and bad.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, definitely. And I would say, don't be scared. Look, I would say respect with a K. Don't be scared. If you really, I think people who write historical romance have a heart for it. It's so funny because I was interviewing, I think it was Jenny Proctor. No, almost every person that I've interviewed so far, because we have the other podcast coming back, almost all of them started off with either historical, some sort of historical, even one was even a historical YA. I was like, what in the world did you do that? And I think, a lot of people do have this desire to share history, right? And to share stories. And so I would say, don't be scared, extend grace to yourself, give yourself room to do it. But I think it's something that, especially in this particular area, that I'd love to see more of them. It's not done often, but it's hard to do. And I can understand that too. And so, yeah, but yeah, it's a great one. You're not going to find any better, even now. You're just not.
Yeah, I think, for anyone who's looking to write, because write a story where the community, like where the what am I trying to say? Like the conflict is both, like it impacts the community, but the community impacts the conflict back. Anyone trying to write any story where that is a phenomenon that's happening in your story, even if it's not historical, this is a really good one for that, because you really do something that Beverly Jenkins does really well, and probably we'll talk about this more in characters, but she kind of showcases the different roles that members of the community play in the conflict, right? That they're what they're all kind of contributing to the movement, but again, how that affects, so how they're affecting the movement and the external problem, but also then how it's affecting them. So you have this kind of this outward push and this inward push. And so it creates this very rich, layered sense of the community, and the community as being like the sort of central place where this is playing out. Mm-hmm. And it's not the same, and of course it isn't, but it's not the same as something like Knock 'Em Out, right? Like what's happening in Knock 'Em Out is a place that we're endeared to sort of secondarily, that we want to spend time, but the actual conflicts are directly, like the community is coming together against a conflict, and again, a conflict is bearing down on this community. So if you have a phenomenon like that in your story, this one is such a good one to look at, because you see the way that those factors are interplaying in the story, and so that it really is like it's a whole community facing a thing together. But it also means, you kind of have people bumping into each other along the way of, people disagree about how exactly it should be done, or people are being, affected in different ways. And so it's building out the community, it's building out the conflict, but it has those layers because you're seeing this very complex look at a community dynamic. So if you want to explore something like that, this is a really great one to read for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that whenever you think about the example with the Knock 'Em Out, I think one of the differences that can be considered, and it could even be considered if you were doing it at the plotting level and you wanted to, is that in the case of this story, the community is set in Whitaker, but the community is actually the Black community, right? So it's really not a community as in this small community like Knock 'Em Out. It's as if you said women in Knock 'Em Out, right? Where the women of the town are a subset of a larger community. And I think that's also what we had here, right? Because they were up against and fighting against essentially representatives of a bigger problem. Mm-hmm. And it's like a representative of a bigger problem. And I honestly feel like that's one of those moments where you got to woman up. You got to be like, listen, I'm about to take this on. And listen, Miss Beverly said, I'm here for you. Hold my beer, right? She said, watch me work. And I think those are decisions as an author that you want to make and understand why you're making them. Mm-hmm. Right. And why you're making them. They never had to say, well, the reason why we're fighting this is because if we win for us, we win for all. Because that's essentially what they're saying. Right. Mm-hmm. It really is because of what they're up against. And they sort of mention that towards the end of the story versus something when you have it. And not just because it's contemporary, but because of how the story is set up. It is meant to be a magnet versus a repellent. Mm-hmm. In Knock 'Em Out. And if you decide that you want to make it so that this community becomes this magnet, what are the things, when you think about Theodore Taylor's, was it seven-figure fiction when she talks about universal fantasies? Like, what is the universal fantasies that are inherent in a small community set or in that sort of community that will be both endearing to the reader as a person, but drawing them into the story? And I think that's one of those things where writers can sort of miss that opportunity because we just pick a place and write. Yeah. Versus, no, my selection is intentional and that it influences, because that selection of that place and that time changed everything. Mm-hmm. There would have been no reason for them to meet. It would have been no reason for her to have to continue to hide him. There would have been no reason for them to keep arguing because he wanted to go to the restroom on his own. There would have been no reason for him to have to, all these different things. And it becomes a domino effect. And so it's one of those moments where the importance of the setting selection and using, it's like getting all the juice from it. Using it to be in your favor. Yeah, absolutely. So much of writing is about choosing with intention, right? Yeah. And just and also asking yourself the hard questions of like, okay, why do I want to do this, or why am I interested in this particular thing, or whatever that thing is, and it just helps you get at the core of what you're trying to do, because then it also, like, when you're writing, sometimes it also helps you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Where it's like, oh, like you feel super committed to a certain idea and you don't want to give it up. And then you ask yourself, like, what is it about this idea that is so captivating to me? And then when you get to the core of that thing, sometimes it helps you shed things that were actually just making it more difficult to write, or that were just not helping you, whatever that case may be. So that you can lock into, like, this is the thing I care about. So this is going to be, the centerpiece of the story, or this is what I'm building off of. But you ask yourself those questions, and then you make very intentional choices. And then you get, great layered stories, and your setting all of a sudden matters. Like, it's not just random that we're in any old place and any old time, but the setting matters to the story. And then you're using it as a source for conflict, and you're driving your characters together, you're driving them to change, and you're really leaning into the choices that you have made, which makes those choices come out on the page that much stronger, because you leaned into them, you chose them with intention, and you, like you said, you squeezed all the juice out of them, you used them fully and completely and thoroughly to participate in the building of your story. I absolutely agree.
Anything else? Any last other points we want to hit before we wrap this episode for the day?
No, I think we have done our thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening. Thank you for joining us again for this conversation. We will be back next week with our discussion of characters in Beverly Jenkins' Indigo. And in the meantime, please like, subscribe, leave reviews, comments, all the things. There's buttons everywhere, whatever platform you're listening on. There's a bell button, there's a thumbs up button, or a heart button. So click all the buttons except the thumbs down one, or the unsubscribe one, and leave us a review, leave us a comment, and you can visit us at storydeepdive.com. Looking forward to seeing you guys back here next week. But until then, happy writing.